Hello, and thank you for watching. This week's character concept will be based on this sketch, which I drew for my portrait study video a while ago now. I'll also try and edit in some of the footage of me actually drawing, but it probably won't be synchronized too well because I tend to time-lapse down my drawing footage just to make it more palatable for a YouTube video. Thanks a lot. The first thing for me to do was to think about what type of character I was drawing. The goal for this character was simplicity. That's ultimately why I chose to draw a portrait when obviously a full body would be more appropriate for a character concept. But I figure to keep this up nearly every week, sometimes I'm just going to have to go with the path of least resistance. All this is to say that the deep character concepting I did this week was really just to apply some horns to an already pretty decent portrait. So here I really don't commit to nailing down the structure of the hair, and this will come back to bite me later on. Just for everyone's information, this is not a trend I want to carry forward as I do these characters each week. The aim will of course be to emphasize the character and not just make a pretty drawing. This is always my favorite part of the process, where I decide where the light source is coming from and then I indicate it using a multiply layer and one tone of color. It's very graphic and simple, but creates what I think is a nice level of 3D dimensionality without the hassle and the confusion of lots of value and lots of color. This is the same approach I took with this commission piece for my boy Eto. And I think I can pinpoint this moment as the moment that I went against my original motto, which was simplicity in this character design. I started to carve out transparency in this multiply layer, essentially requiring me to actually render out forms. For someone who wants to increasingly focus on animation and character design, rather than painting and concept art, I'm not sure why I did this. Something I've noticed is that when it comes to coloring, I have a tendency to lean towards rendering, even though it's not something I particularly enjoy or something that I'm particularly competent in. It's worth noting here that although I thought this was a rather uninspired and generic design, I looked back at some of my older work and it seems I have a proclivity for sticking horns on characters. So with the multiply shadow layer mostly established and the flat colors for the hair, horns, eyes and lips all laid down, it was time to take a swing at some of the lighting and highlights. And here's where the structure of the hair comes back to bite me. I need to make the connection between the forehead and the horn make sense within the overall context of the hair as well. You can see at this point I've added some abstract lighting behind the character. This was inspired directly by the original reference image for the original portrait, in which she was backlit to provide some dynamic rim lighting. It's difficult to give any useful commentary at this stage because largely it's me wandering around the picture and sporadically rendering highlights, shadows, changes in value and hue. Basically, it's a free-for-all. I'm sure the process would be more efficient and more enjoyable if I had a solid process to stick to, but unfortunately I'm sans a plan, and so I'm just muscling my way through. So to peel back the curtain a little bit, I actually record these videos as I'm still going through the stages of the drawing. Unfortunately, this means that I can be feeling like I'm wrapping up the drawing, everything is going well, and then to be a little less obtuse, I'm talking specifically about how much better this looks in values than it does as a color drawing. This tells me I'm on track with my values, but off track with regard to the saturation or hue, maybe both. It also means a lot more work, and that the video is going to be longer than I anticipated. Immediately I can see that one reason the value version looks better than the color version is the hair. It was probably too close in hue to the skin color and the lips, so I changed it to a darker grey brown. This provides some nice contrast that was only present in the value version. So I get back to rendering, this time with an improved understanding of just how far away from completion I am. Crucial to keeping myself in check is constantly flipping on the black and white value layer to see if I've made any improvements in that area. And you can see now an extreme desaturation in the skin. This was performed by applying a black colorized layer. And the reason is because I felt like my skin was super saturated. It's easy to see why. I was drawing a demon spawn girl, and obviously your natural inclination is to use a fairly saturated red. However, for that realistic skin look, I think this desaturated version looks a little bit better. Obviously, when I started, the intention was not to make something very realistic, but since we're heading down that path, and I've already embraced the extra work, I might as well go for it. Here, I'm taking a break from rendering and creating some extra work for myself by testing out some fireball effects. But on advice from a friend, I decided to go with smoke. Okay, keep an eye on that hand. We're approaching the moment where I almost quit the drawing altogether. I decided that the hand looked kind of weird and also anatomically incorrect, and so I opted to go back to the reference and redraw the whole thing. This was a disaster, as that and a lot of other work got done, and then the computer crashed with no backups of the image or the recording. After a small tantrum, I bit down on my mouthpiece and got back to work. But for the third time of drawing his hand, I allowed myself the shortcut of just color picking the reference, changing the hue in the color wheel, and then it became a game of just mashing shapes together. Okay, so I'm gonna call it here. I think this piece could definitely use some more love, especially with regard to the hair and the ear and just about every edge on the character. but I'm sick of the sight of it, and I kind of hate myself for turning this fun character drawing exercise into a render farm. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers.